even more shame then on the FIA for not doing something about it. If Charles now saying, yeah, well, it was basically me, the FIA then are wrong in their assessment, which was that both drivers caused an unavoidable collision. And that's wrong. They should be correcting that now and apologizing and they should be thinking of taking some sort of action, because that is inexcusable. I keep saying 300 plus kilometers an hour. The worst accidents we can have in Formula One now are going to be on the straight, because there's less runoff area, there's no real protection on the barriers, and they're very, very high speed. That's why the Romain Grosjean accident was so bad, because nobody really expected the car to go off there. It was considered to be kind of, well, we're almost on the straight there. If you go off on a corner these days, there's a lot of runoff area. There's Tech Pro barriers, there's all sorts of things. But on the straight, there's very little. And that's why this needs to be jumped upon. And I think something, if Charles, now that we know Charles has said that, and he's correct to, obviously, to apologize, something needs to be done. I mean, to say that Max moved over is ludicrous, because he was the guy that had lost momentum. He was on the left side of the track. He was going slower than Charles. Maybe he moved a fraction more to the center of the road where it's a little bit cleaner or something like that. I don't know, maybe. But Charles had the pass. He was much quicker. He had everything. Obviously, he was going to be in front going into turn one. Why did he need to be, why did he need to be that close to Max anyway? And B, having got that close, why did he then edge to the left? If anything, you edge to the right. Just give the, why do you want to have, I just don't see the point. There was no toe involved at that point. He was well past him. All Charles needed to do was move the steering a little bit to the right, just to make sure there's a bit of clearance, instead of which he moves the steering to the left and they touch. And I was absolutely astonished. Well, I was astonished that it took the stewards so long to even review that. That should have been the first thing that was reviewed long before the George incident, because of its very high speed and incredibly potentially dangerous. Whereas the George incident was a sporting regulations thing, but not massively potentially dangerous. And then when the ruling came out, long after the checkered flag had fallen, that both drivers had caused an unavoidable collision or something like that, no further action will be taken. I found that absolutely astonishing. And I don't know whether that's a function of the new view of sporting regulations and penalties or what, but when two cars collide at over 300 kilometers an hour, which is 180 miles an hour on the straight, that is not something worthy of the little throwaway phrase, no further action will be taken. And for me, there was no blame on Max there. The blame was obviously that he lost the back end, but I mean, Charles thought yes at that moment and went to the right, got him easily, and then just moved to the left and hit him at that speed. And I keep saying at that speed, because if you touch the way they touched at 100 kilometers an hour, it's nothing, as we saw later on going into turn 5. But at that speed, maybe I'm just an old fogey, and I can obviously I wasn't there, but I read about it a million times. The Taffy Von Tripp's Jim Clark accident at Monza in '61, when they just touched in exactly the same way at high speed going into the parabolica, and because there were no guardrails, 15 people were killed, including Taffy. And yes, the cars are different today, and you can collide without any damage really, which seemed to be the case. But you can nonetheless interlock wheels. I mean, it only would have taken Max thinking, what's going on here? And for a millisecond, just lifting his foot slightly for them to interlock wheels, and one of them would have gone up in the air for sure. Of course, they both stayed flat, and that didn't happen. But that's because they're both very good racing drivers. Although, we'll put Charles to one side and what he did just then. I'll talk about that in a second. But if that was, I don't know, Franco Colapinto and Liam Lawson doing the same thing, that's when you've got to start setting an example in your rulings, because something bad can happen. If they allow that to happen with no further action being taken at 300 kilometers an hour, that sends an incredibly bad message to the rest of motorsport, to the younger generation of motorsport, of racing drivers. Now, getting on to Charles, I mean, Charles he's like Max. He's got all these different personalities, and he's very emotional, unlike Max. And what he was doing with Max there reminded me that he's still the driver that had that GP2 or F2 race with Alex Albon at Abu Dhabi in the final there. And that was going on the straight. That was going on into the end of the straight, was going on into the entry to the straight. Talk to Alex Albon about that. I mean, that was as vicious as it can get. That was Ayrton Senna, you know, looking pretty mild, actually, what Charles was doing that day. And you'd think, oh, well, that was back then in the F2 days. Well, that's what I used to think. But now I'm thinking, hang on, give Charles a little bit of adrenaline, and he's still capable of doing that, which is bizarre because, well, I suppose that's why he is such an interesting guy and such a good racing driver, because he's got all these different facets. He is very emotional. He does have that incredibly aggressive side in traffic. But he's a beautiful racing driver to watch in terms of what he does with the car. He's not far away from Max and his touch and feel. And to see these two guys who basically are the class drivers of 2025, I would put them ahead of Piastri and Norris in terms of what they're doing with their cars at the moment, then, you know, it was kind of sad to see them bashing wheels at 300 kilometers an hour. I say bashing wheels, see Charles driving into Max. That's how it should be phrased. I think it wasn't that at all. And yeah, Nigel Mansell and Ayrton Senna showed how to do it in Barcelona 91. They couldn't have got much closer without touching, but they didn't touch, did they? Just absolutely pin sharp. And I think basically Max was in that mode. And it's just that Charles, unlike Nigel, comes across on him. And that's the problem. So yeah, I mean, the other facet of Charles, and we'll probably get onto it, are these weird things that keep happening to him. The odd, you know, mysterious off for no reason. But then beyond that, I'm still confused as to why in Q3, with only one new set of softs left to run, he chose to run it early in Q3 and not when the track was quickest at the end. George Russell had been giving us a really nice job with the weather forecasting, telling us there were dark clouds over turn 12, and thanks George for that. Very good weather boy. And there was, but it wasn't raining, and everybody was out, and it wasn't raining. So end of story. Thank you, George. But Charles went out early. I mean, traffic, to avoid the traffic, because they only had one set. I mean, if you take him out of it, that's 9. I don't think Hadjar was out. I don't think Fernando was out. So you're looking at 7 cars on track. So it wasn't really a traffic issue. What was it? He could have qualified 2 grid positions higher, probably. I just don't get that. And that's the sort of these weird things that happen sometimes with Charles Leclerc. You think, what was that all about? A little bit like, except it wasn't at 300 kilometers an hour. It was just talking about when to go out in Q3. There's all these different things with Charles makes him a fascinating racing driver. And I'm really glad we got him in Formula One, obviously. It sounds patronizing, I suppose, but I'm a big Charles fan. But I was shocked at what happened yesterday, that's for sure.